Howdy, Pilgrim. Well, with the Haslab project for the G.I. Joe Classified Dragonfly finally coming to a close, I wanted to weigh in on the debate over whether or not big corporations crowdfunding projects is sleazy corporate greed or an understandable business practice. At the risk of drawing the scorn of many toy fans and some of my favorite toy discussion channels on YouTube, like Retroblasting and Analog Toys, I'm going to make an argument in favor of, or at least empathizing with, big corporations' decision to crowdfund certain projects for relatively expensive special offerings. Let's face it, big corporations and toy companies don't like to take risks. They want sure bets. They will not make a product unless they have a buyer already on the hook. My guess is they propose a number of units and price to potential buyers like Walmart and Target, and to specialty online shops like Entertainment Earth and Big Bad Toy Store. And then they only make the product if they have a buyer up front. Now I'd like to weigh in on their character selection for tiers. Hasbro has a policy that if a Haslab project or tier fails, they will never offer that identical product again. Hasbro also doesn't want to upset or lose potential buyers who want particular figures but don't want to back the project. So their best option is to make tier goals figures and add-ons that they don't risk losing as much money on if they can't make them later for standalone release, and that fans won't be upset about passing on. This probably explains why Haslab did not make Ula and Slave Leia as tiers for the Rancor project. They wanted to preserve the possibility of making these popular characters and figures for general release in the future, both for their own potential profits and to avoid upsetting fans who would want them but not want the Rancor. Instead, they offered repacked versions of popular characters, hoping that collectors might want them just for the special packaging. By doing this, they did not risk losing the possibility to ever make these characters again, but merely to lose the possibility to release them in that special packaging. It actually seems like a pretty wise choice if you consider it from their point of view. In order to explain why tiers might be seen as generous, let's look at a simplified example. When producing anything, there are usually fixed costs for things like tooling, fixtures, buildings, etc., and variable costs like the cost of materials. In this simplified example, a company decides to build prefabricated, small homes. The upfront tooling costs for this include nail guns, power saws, workbenches, paint sprayers, paint spraying booths, etc. For simplicity, let's imagine these upfront tooling costs are $20,000. Now, in addition to tools, they must also buy materials for their houses, like lumber, nails, windows, drywall, insulation, plumbing, wiring, and paint. For simplicity, let's imagine the cost of all materials is $20,000 per home. Now let's imagine that the company calculates that in order to be profitable for them, the total cost of each house they make must be $25,000 or less. If they only make one home, the cost is $20,000 for tooling, plus $20,000 for materials, which is $40,000 total. They would lose money in this case. If they make two houses, that's $20,000 for tooling, plus 2 times $20,000 for materials, which is $60,000 total. In that case, the cost per house would be $30,000 each, and the company would still lose money. Now if they make 4 houses, that's $20,000 for tooling, plus 4 times $20,000 for materials, for a total cost of $100,000. At this point, the cost per house is now $25,000 and would meet the requirement so the company could make profit. So 4 houses is the minimum they must sell to make the project worthwhile for them. But what if they sold 5 houses? Now the cost would be $20,000 for tooling, plus 5 times $20,000 for materials, which is a total of $120,000. $120,000 divided by 5 houses is $24,000 per house. What if the company sold 10 houses? $20,000 for tooling plus 10 times $20,000 for materials adds up to $220,000, or a cost of $22,000 for each house. And if they sold 20 houses, the total cost would be $20,000 for tooling plus 20 times $20,000 for materials, which is $420,000. That would make their cost $21,000 per house. So where am I going with all this? Well, if the company were really greedy, they would stick to their original design of the house and offer nothing more, no matter how many they made and how low the cost dropped below $25,000. However, if they were generous, or some might call it just being fair, they would include extras as their cost per house dropped. If this were the case, they could add $1,000 in improvements to the original design if they sold just 5 houses. They could add $3,000 in improvements to the original design if they sold 10 houses. And they could add $4,000 in improvements to the original design if they sold 20 houses or more. They don't have to include these upgrades, but they decide that as long as they can keep the cost at $25,000 per unit, they will pass the reduced cost of scale onto their customer in the form of upgrades. Now, I admit, I never studied business in school, and I never worked for a toy company. I was, however, an engineer at a company that produced small parts in high volume, and have some idea what tooling and fixtures cost. I also enjoyed watching Shark Tank on TV, and have some idea of what kind of margins companies expect and need to be profitable and to satisfy investors. From what I've seen on Shark Tank, that's often about 80% profit, or I should say 80% net profit, which is the total sales minus the cost of the goods divided by the total sales. With that 80% net profit margin in mind, and some basic idea of what the tooling and materials might cost, I used a spreadsheet to work around and play with the numbers until I came up with some estimates that I think might be in the ballpark of what Haslab pays. So on the spreadsheet, in the first column, you will see the number of units sold, going from 1,000 up to 20,000 units. In the second column, you'll see the total sales revenue based upon the number of units sold, which is calculated by multiplying the number of units sold by the unit price of $275 each. In the third column, you'll see my ballpark estimate for the cost of tooling for the Dragonfly helicopter itself. Because of the amount of tooling involved in making all the separate parts of the Dragonfly, I estimated the cost of tooling to be about $300,000. This would include molds, paint masks, and assembly fixtures for the body parts, panels, canopy, skids, rotors, rocket launchers, missiles, missile effects, etc. In the fourth column, I have my ballpark estimated price for the cost of tooling for Wild Bill. For Wild Bill, I assumed the tooling cost of $60,000, again, including molds, paint masks, assembly fixtures, etc. In the fifth column, I have my ballpark estimate for the cost of tooling for Ripcord. Now for Ripcord, I assumed only $10,000 for tooling because I believe they will make a regular release of him with his more conventional paint scheme. Thus, I allocated his mold and assembly fixtures to that project and only charged this project for the paint masks needed to make the Night Force version. In the sixth column, I have my ballpark estimate for the costs of Glenda's tooling. With Glenda, I again assumed $60,000 tooling because I think she is another standalone figure, though I could be wrong and her tooling costs may well be assigned to a future Scarlet project. In the seventh column, we have my ballpark estimate for the cost of tooling for Crazy Legs. And again with Crazy Legs, I assumed only $10,000 for painting masks, as I believe his mold costs will be allocated to a more conventional mainline version later on. For the next columns, I have estimated the cost of materials for the helicopter, Wild Bill, Ripcord, Glenda, and Crazy Legs. For materials, meaning mostly plastic and paint, I assumed $15 for each helicopter made and $4 for each figure. So in the column you'll see for the helicopter $15 multiplied by the number produced, and for each figure I will have $4 multiplied by the total number produced. The final two columns show us first the total estimated production cost when we sum up all of the tooling and material costs for each row, and the very last column on the right shows the percent net profit estimated based on the number of units sold and the tiers that had been unlocked. The formula I used to calculate percent net profit was total sales minus cost divided by the total sales. So when you see something like 80%, that would mean that 80% of the total sales was net profit. Or you could say for $20 cost, they made $80 profit. So essentially 4 times the cost of the goods themselves. Now if 80% net profit sounds really high at first, keep in mind that does not include the salaries for employees, any land or buildings that they own, computers, hardware, etc., or the return on the investment for their investors. Remember, there's other companies out there competing for investors' money, and so the investors will go with a company that produces higher profits, and so they all are about in the same range. As you can see, looking down this last column of estimated net profit, the percent net profit increases as the number of units sold increases. However, the percent profit drops back closer to 80% every time a new tier is unlocked. This is why I believe the tiers are more likely intended to be bonuses to thank fans, rather than incentives, though of course they serve both purposes. One other thing I'd like to address, using the Dragonfly project as an example, is the issue of sales momentum. I've seen many comments on other channels suggesting that the Tier 2 offering of Glenda caused sales momentum to drop off. While I agree that there may be some truth to this assertion, I believe the bigger factor was that after the initial wave of buyers had all backed the project within the first few days, there was bound to be a lull or drop-off in sales momentum. Many backers, myself included, may not have been sure they wanted to spend $275 on the project, and so we waited until closer to the deadline to make our final decision. As the final deadline approached, fear of missing out drove myself and others to back the project. The reveal of Crazy Legs as the final tier may indeed have been the factor that drove some people to finally back the project, but for others like me, it wasn't so much the inclusion of Crazy Legs that brought us around, as it was the fear of missing out. Of course, we all feel that the total price is a better deal with the inclusion of 3 extra figures. I'm just not so sure that was the most important factor driving the last-minute sales. Certainly Crazy Legs didn't hurt, but was he the main reason we saw over 7,000 new backers in the final week of the order window? Maybe he was, but my reasoning tells me it had more to do with the order window closing than it had to do with what figure or bonuses were offered with the final tier being unlocked. While I do agree that backing these projects encourages Hasbro and Mattel to make more of them, and that they use such projects to gauge how much we fans are willing to pay for their products, I also believe such projects are the only way these corporations would be willing to make these products. Without the support of a retail buyer like Walmart or Target, we, the fans, become the upfront buyer. Without those upfront assurances that they will make a profit from a product, they simply will not risk making them. While it may not be a popular opinion, I think we should respect the right of each person to choose for themselves whether or not a product is worth the asking price. Even if a project is not right for you or me, we can respect other people's right to choose how to spend their own money. Yes, in the end we do vote with our dollars, but let's do our best not to shame each other for how we spend our money. We don't all have to agree, but let's try to support each other's right to choose. And with that, thank you for watching. Please share your thoughts in the comments section, and please be respectful. And until next time, goodbye everybody.